Is it working now? Ah, good. So in an effort to begin, we will begin. That's that. So thank you so much for joining us, and I'm delighted to see such a great turnout for this session. We'll be talking about women in the media, and it's going to be a very sort of three-dimensional session, because we're not just talking about women who work in the media, and we're not just talking about women being covered in the media, and we're not just talking about one or two things, but we want to look at it very holistically. So I'm very lucky. Well, first of all, I should note we had a moderator, but he had to go to the airport. So we will be self-moderating, which I think we're capable of doing, just to show we're the women in the media. So we will demonstrate our prowess by moderating ourselves. Also, for those of you who are watching via the live stream, thank you so much for joining us. We're delighted that you are watching. And as I mentioned, I'll be taking questions via Twitter. So if you're watching and you have questions, and I've already gotten some great ones, if you could tweet me at Lucy Marcus, and then I'll take your questions, and we'll be taking a lot of questions from the room. So I guess we'll start with I'll start with a little introduction, and then we'll go from there. I must admit that I am next to two people who I adore and admire very much. It's not that I'm trying to get all my friends to come to Perugia to hang out with me, but here they are. And there are seats, for those of you who are standing but want to sit, there are some seats here, or there are many, or you can be on the stage with us, because we're happy to share the stage. So Gabriella Stern, how long have we known each other? 15 years? And Gabby has worked in various capacities for Dow Jones and the Wall Street Journal for 30 years.
I was there for almost 25 years.
Okay, almost 25 years. I'm expanding. And she recently left 3 months ago to become the Director of Communications for...
Director of Media and External Relations for the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation.
Good. And Catherine Mayer, who I adore. Do men say that on panels? Is a world-renowned journalist who wrote for The Economist and also for Time magazine, and had a book come out last year, which was a biography of Prince Charles. But also, and it's almost unbelievable to all of us in some ways, about a year ago, she was at a conference and she came up with an idea to start the Women's Equality Party. And a year later, they have someone running for Mayor of London, as well as a number of other positions, and it has grown huge. Really huge. Yeah. And so it's extraordinary. And then you see, you have women who have worked in the media who are doing other things, and we'll draw from that. It's very strange to introduce yourself, I do a couple things. I write a column for Project Syndicate. I've written for Reuters, the BBC, a number of other places, but I'm an opinion columnist, and I also sit on the board of a multinational company based here in Rome, Atlantia, and I sit on a number of boards. So when I'm writing, I'm very much opinion-based because, well, I have opinions and I like to share them. And so one of the things I'm going to talk a little bit about is women in the media, writing in the media, and also getting more voices in the media. But I thought I would start with Gabby, and let me just say this. We definitely want your questions, and because we want to talk about the things that you're interested in. And I've also suggested that one of the things we want to do when we are done with the panel is that you walk out with concrete things to know, because many of us know there's a problem. Okay? And we're going to talk about what the problem is a little bit, but then we want to talk about solutions and suggestions and things that we can all be doing. So, Gabby, can you talk a little bit about your background and your career, and also some of your experiences and you think that might be interesting to share?
Sure. So I'm 55 years old. So I've been working for a long time. 25 years at the Wall Street Journal and Dow Jones, and then there was a decade before that at a regional newspaper called the Omaha World Herald in Nebraska. So I was in journalism for a long time, and as Lucy said, now I'm doing communications, media relations, meaning I work with journalists and talk to them about covering our issues, which are really related to global poverty, global health, development, women and girls, gender and equity issues. And then we also do media grants to media organizations around the world to enable them to cover these issues, because very often these are issues that news organizations would not ordinarily cover because they're complicated and they're serious and they're not about sports or entertainment, and the audiences don't naturally gravitate to them, even though they're very compelling. In terms of the women problem that Lucy described, there are many dimensions to the women problem. But in the context of the news business, of journalism and communications, there's two broad problems. One is, how do we cover women? And then the other one is the role of women in the organizations that are doing journalism or communications. Let's talk a little bit about coverage of women. There's still, I remember when I started out, ages ago, we would talk in the newsroom, this would be in the 70s or the 80s, about why are the pictures on the front page of the paper always men? Why are the people quoted, the experts, always men? And we still have that problem. For whatever reason, journalists still tend to gravitate to the male figures of authority when they're quoting experts, and more than likely it'll be a picture of a male expert or a male VIP on the covers on the home pages and newspaper pages. So I just think it's a continual effort that we have to make to diversify the people that we're quoting, not just in a gender way, but also don't always go back to the same sources, whether it's at the same investment bank. If you're a financial reporter, talk to people from multiple banks, and if you're a political reporter, talk to political experts from all sorts of consultancies. Likewise, make sure you're talking to women experts and not just men. Also, I just think that we have to be really conscious of how we cover women VIPs. And I've been very struck by the coverage of Hillary Clinton lately. Yeah. And this is me talking as me, Gabriella Stern, not as the Gates Foundation media director. But I think that we have double standards when we report on women VIPs. I think that some of the coverage of Hillary Clinton, who, as you know, is the leading contender for the Democratic nomination for US president, she's a flawed candidate, but every candidate is flawed. And, but I think she's being held to a higher standard. And I think that when we cover important, significant women in politics, business, whatever, we have to say, would we be using this language to describe a comparable man? Would we be holding this? Would we be holding a comparable man to the same standards? And so these are the things that are top of mind for me. In a few minutes, I'd love to talk a little bit about women in the workplace and how we're judged and so on, but that's where I'm going to stop this answer at this point.
I mean, the most recent narrative about Hillary is that she's too ambitious, or she tries, there was some phrase.
A few years ago, she was criticized for wearing a T-shirt with décolleté, and now she's being criticized for being, too whatever it is, stiff.
But shouting is the thing that she.
Shouting.
It's that everybody else speaks, but she shouts.
Yeah, that's the shrill woman trope, right?
Yeah.
Catherine, talk to us. See how we self-moderate? I'm not a micromanager.
Microphone manager.
Exactly.
Like Gabriella, I'm kind of a recovering journalist, as opposed to necessarily still being a journalist. Though I am writing another book, and I intend to keep writing, but I have made this diversion into politics. One of the 6 core objectives of the political party that I set up, the Women's Equality Party, which, as Lucy explained, has grown incredibly fast from an idea last March to becoming an official party in July, to now having 45,000 members and supporters, 73 branches across the UK, and we're running in elections in London, Wales and Scotland this May. So incredible. We tapped into an appetite that was already there, if you like. But one of our 6 core objectives towards gender equality is equal treatment of women by and in the media, because those things are intrinsically linked. As Lucy explained, I worked at The Economist. I worked for 11 years actually writing in German for Focus magazine. I've done business journalism, whatever, and then for the last 11 years I was at Time magazine and was at one point Europe editor, so responsible for Europe, Middle East and Africa editions of the magazine, and also an editor at large. I have seen at first hand throughout my career, I'm exactly the same age as Gabriella as well, so same length of career. I've seen enormous changes in the industry, and of course some of those changes have been very exciting. The rise of digital offered all sorts of possibilities, but one of the impacts of that is that the business model for journalism that sustained it during many of the years I was working in it no longer sustains it in the same way to the same degree, and so there's a lot of turbulence in the media. And some of the advances that I saw during my time in terms of better diversity in newsrooms, and this is, as Gabriella said, it's not just about gender diversity, it's diversity within gender. So, I mean, newsrooms are horribly white. Mm-hmm. Newsrooms are horribly, horribly undiverse in terms of class and economic background. In the UK, it's particularly bad where you have these newsrooms where sort of basically every single person there is not only a man, but went to the same small group of public schools and then to Oxbridge. And that leads to a distortion in the coverage that you get, because there's a kind of groupthink where people approach subjects the same way, they ascribe the same levels of importance to subjects. Mm-hmm. I'll give you an example of what should have been a really big story that was broken by a female editor and a female journalist recently. Eleanor Mills at the Sunday Times, she's the editorial director there, commissioned the amazing female journalist Christina Lamb to go to Nigeria and do an amazing bit of investigative reporting on the girls who were kidnapped by Boko Haram. That piece, they gave it as much of a push as they could. They took the paywall off it so that it could be shared on social media, all the things that would normally slow down a piece. But the uptake on that piece, the reactions to that piece were really telling. It was a shocking, amazing piece of journalism, and yet it made almost no dent in the national news schedules. There are many, many reasons for why that is, but gender has something to do with it, and the fact that the girls who were kidnapped are black African children instead of white children definitely made a difference there. Mm-hmm. So I'm just using that as an example for the ways in which the media ascribes importance to some subjects and not to others. And for me, in order to achieve gender equality in all areas of life, we absolutely urgently have to address the imbalance in media coverage of women, because the lack of representation, but the reductive representation of women in media actually feeds through into repercussions in every area you can possibly think of.
Great. I'm starting to get some great questions on Twitter, so I'm making notes of those, and I'll integrate them into our conversation. I guess one of the things, since I write opinion, I think one of the things that's worth talking about is women and opinion, both those who are quoted, but also those who write, because at Project Syndicate, you know, they're working on getting more of a balance, but there are not very many of us. And oftentimes, someone who I don't see her here, but said to me this morning, "Oh, maybe you'd like to do some opinion writing for us. And I said, I'm very expensive. Because, there's this assumption as well that, and I'm not saying that she was making that assumption, but I get a lot of calls of, it would be good for you to write for us because we can give you good exposure. Thank you, I'm okay. What would be good for me? To give me money. Get some money in my pocket. And also, I think women often feel before they start writing that they need to be perfect, that they have to be the expert, that they don't know enough, that they're not good enough in some way. And we're not so good at throwing our hearts over the fences and jumping after it. And I think one of the things that we need to do for each other is encourage each other to write, because, everybody's doing the best they can. And one of the things that has been observed, is an old observation for years and years, is if you see a job description and a man reads it and a woman reads it, if a man has sort of 30% of the skills necessary, he's like, I can do that. But for women, you need to have 110% before you feel confident enough to apply for the job or whatever. And so I think our job as people who write, and also people who are gatekeepers, and people who are friends, people who the ability, the access to places to write, giving opinion on Twitter, writing on Medium, writing on LinkedIn. So you don't necessarily have to go to all the places where there are gatekeepers as there were in the past. You can start sharing your ideas. When I started writing, I started writing on the Huffington Post, and then I was writing for HBR, and then I was writing for Reuters, and it just progressed over time. I just decided to put it out there. And to be honest, the way that happened is my husband told me I was good enough. I was not sure of myself. I kept waiting and waiting until I really felt sure of myself. And he said, just write. And then if people like it, they'll read it, they'll share it. And luckily my husband is a feminist, and our son is a feminist. So I think that's one thing, is we need to encourage women to feel brave enough. Even when I call women I know and ask them for a quote, they're like, oh, I don't know if I know enough. You know enough to say 5 words on a topic. You know enough. I'm not asking for an academic paper on the topic. I just want 5 words and your name and title. That's it. And so we need to be better about opening that up. One of the questions that has come in is one that Catherine and I have talked about, which is quotas. And what's interesting is there are a lot of issues that we see in all sectors. So I talk about them in the world of boards, but also in the world of media and so on. Should we have quotas for hiring and so on? And without it, the question is, women work really hard, but men get the jobs. How are we going to address that, and do we need to have quotas? So maybe, Catherine, you talk about that a little
bit. Sure. The funny thing about the argument about quotas is, of course, that there are unofficial quotas operating. There are unofficial quotas operating that mean that men have had the majority of jobs and the majority of decision-making power for a very long time in just about every area. So the question is about how to break through that. Gina Davis, the film actor, has an institute that also studies the representation of women in film. And one of the things that she noticed was, or that they discovered, was that in films, you never get above 17% of women on the screen, even though women are 51% of the population. And that presumably as a result of unconscious bias, even in crowd scenes, you would still only have 17% women in crowds rather than 51%. So one of the reasons that we need, in some cases, targets, because obviously if you're talking about things like drama, it does become quite difficult to set actual hard quotas. But you either need very, very specific targets, or in some cases quotas, in order just to break through that level of unconscious bias and to make the change and to start creating the pipeline. But of course, it's not, they're not enough on their own. The thing about quotas is they're a useful short-term mechanism, but they need so many other things in order to retain talent, to keep that process going.
The BBC put in place quotas for panel shows, didn't they? And that got a mixed reaction.
Well, I mean, I do think that there are really obvious areas where you can have quotas, and one of them is that it is shocking how many programs that are basically news discussion programs still have completely all male lineups, all white lineups. That really shouldn't be happening. They should reflect the populations that they're there to serve.
Do you have any comment on that? Or?
I didn't, you really covered it beautifully. I wanted to just say something about, you were talking about, pay me for my work. And one of the things, and just, you alluded to mentoring, and I just sort of wanted to, and also the whole confidence gap that women have. And I just sort of wanted to say, one of the things I always tell women that I mentor, and a lot of women and men come to me for career advice. I'm sort of the mom / older sister for a lot of people because I've been in the business for a long time.
And you're very good at it.
Oh, thank you. I always say, especially to women, ask for money.
Yeah.
Ask for more money.
Ask for money.
Every opportunity you have, ask for more money, because if you don't ask, you don't get. Yeah. And probably men are better at it.
Much.
I don't actually know that. I suspect that.
No, they are. There's a lot of research,
right?
sadly.
So every inflection in your career, you get a new beat, or you get a new job title or whatever, always ask for money, because that's the moment to do it. Asking in between new assignments, you do it when appropriate, and then I can advise them on when is the right moment, because there are moments not to ask for money.
During cutbacks.
During cutbacks. Well, I mean, oddly
fruit.
enough, sometimes during a cutback it is a moment,
that's right.
because they're restructuring and you're being given more responsibility or something. Ask for more money. I think that's really important. And on the confidence thing, and looking at a job description and saying I can't do it, what I always say to men and women is, if it gives you, this will sound silly, but if it gives you butterflies in your tummy, if it makes you a little nervous, it means you should go for it, because it's exciting to you, you feel you'll be stretched, you feel like it's the opportunity that you've been waiting for, and you're nervous about it, and you don't feel confident, but go for it. The worst that can happen is you research the job, you go before the hiring manager, you make your pitch, and you don't get it. That's the worst that can happen. The best that can happen is you get the job, and then the kind of positive middle ground is that the boss then knows that you're ambitious and interested in moving on and up, and that's good for the boss to know. And sometimes women and some men they feel that they'll be looked upon as kind of arrogant and ambitious and striving, and well, why not? If it's sort of like with asking for money. If you don't show you're interested, you're not going to get those promotions by and large.
So that's a good lead into the transition you've just made, because after almost 25 years in journalism, you made a big leap, and you thought about it. You did a lot of planning and thinking and so on, and you made a leap to a wonderful place for you. So.
Well, for me, it was interesting because I was applying for jobs as an older woman. Right? I'm 55, and so I didn't know how would I be perceived as sort of, over the hill, about, that kind of thing. And that could apply to men too. I mean, I think
too experienced is the...
Too experienced.
We've heard it.
But it actually worked out very well, and I don't think I experienced gender bias in my search. I mean, you never know. I had a wonderful male mentor who's sitting there, Raju, but it was actually really wonderful because I found this incredibly supportive group of friends and colleagues who wanted to help me make a transition that I wanted badly to make. And just a word about spouses, it really does help when your partner, your husband, your wife is there to liberate you.
Yeah.
And in my case, and I think it's true of a fair number of women who have had consuming careers. My husband has been a full-time dad pretty much since the year 2000, taking care of me and our two children. doing some work part-time, but his support enabled me to drag the family around the world. We lived in many places when I was working for the Journal. And so there are wonderful partners out there, and they should be celebrated.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's interesting because also oftentimes I get asked, you know, this work-life balance question. And what I say is I have no balance, but I love what I do. And so I can, you know, I make my choices, and as I get older, I'm actually much pickier about my choices.
But can I say that's a gendered question?
Yeah.
I do not see interviews with male business leaders or senior male journalists being asked about their work-life balance. I do not hear them being asked about what their childcare arrangements are. All of that is something where there is an assumption that this is women's business to, you know, and that's one of the things that I have seen over a very long career is some very great female journalists dropping out when they have had children and tried to come back again, because again the assumptions are that it is their business to look after their children.
Just like this morning. I mean, so I had a panel this morning, and
she's telling tales out of school.
No. But no, I think it's useful because actually it was not well intentioned, but it was surprising. So I did a panel. I put together a panel on reporting on complex economic news. You can see it on the YouTube, I was introduced as, you know, all these different things, and also a mother, and I've never been, and our panel, by the way, had 3 women and 1 man, and it wasn't the man. So it was, I think it's also a habit thing, and you know, I think it was supposed to be complimentary, but I was like, what? and also all the women in the room were like, and I think we also have to, you know, look to ourselves and make sure that we're holding ourselves to a high standard of, you know, sort of who you are, what you do, and how you help other women.
I agree, but interestingly, I think the thing that I recognize that I have done wrong in my past career was that I was so determined not to be shuffled off into a female area of reporting. You know, I was so determined that I was going to do conflict reporting and, you know, the big male subjects, that it means that you actually steer clear sometimes of acknowledging and writing about gender issues, because that itself can become a female ghetto, because you don't really see men writing about gender, for example. And so now, looking back, I've thought actually it meant that unintentionally I kind of upheld the status quo, even while I thought I was out there being a sort of, you know, a trailblazer or a role model or whatever it was. Actually, sometimes we need to turn around and look at the editorial decisions that are being made, look at the way they're being made, and actually challenge them on that basis head on. But it's quite a scary thing to do.
But it's so funny you should say that. I will share with you a conundrum. It's a genuine conundrum, which is I write about corporate governance and boards and ethics in business and so on. I think I'm pretty good at it. And yet, when I get called to give a quote, I'm often called as, you're an expert in women on boards. No, I'm an expert on boards. You know, I mean, I have an opinion about women on boards, but actually, you know, I can talk to you about the banking system, I can talk to you about ethics, I can talk to you about a lot of things. I can talk to you about women on boards, but why don't you call me when you have another question not about women on boards? And I shy away from it. And the other thing is, I haven't in many, many years actually written about women on boards, precisely because, even though I have very strong opinions on it, and people know my opinions on it, I don't want to be pigeonholed into, you're the woman who writes about women on boards. Yeah. There is a natural assumption that, you know, I'm a chick, so I write about chick stuff. I would say that I think in some ways I write about things differently with my perspective. It's a much more holistic perspective to a certain extent. But to be honest, I do stay away from it because it just keeps rearing its ugly head. And I wrote a piece that actually has stood the test of time, that was a scathing piece about women on boards and how there weren't enough women, and, you know, everyone was congratulating themselves that everything was sorted. And so that's what I send that piece out whenever anybody needs an opinion on it or something. But
I think that piece needs to be written again and many, many times.
do you?
Yeah, well,
Maybe one of you can write it. No, I mean, I don't mind writing it, but I just, of all the, for Project Syndicate, all the pieces I've written, everything, I keep thinking I should write something about women on boards or, about women in the workplace and so on. But even with that body of work, I'm pretty sure that people would ignore that entire body of work that's about, FIFA and banking and corporate social responsibility, all this other stuff, and be like, oh, she writes about women on boards. So that's my being very honest with you about some of the choices I make that speak to what you're talking about. The other thing is you brought up something that actually we have a question about, which essentially is about trying to conform in the workplace. Right. It's a question about authenticity. Yeah. And I mean, when I talk about that and do mentoring and so on, part of in the business world at least, when you look at banking or consulting or something like that, the object is for everybody to be the same. You want to have your work product be the same or better as your colleagues, and everything is supposed to look the same. There comes an inflection point in your career when you need to differentiate yourself, because everybody has a good CV, so how do you make yourself different than the other people who were there? And that's when you have to really embrace who you are and be much more authentic. But that's the old advice I would give. I think I would change that a little and start a little earlier in a way. You still have to do really good work product, but you don't have to leave yourself at home. And I mean, certainly as I get older, I am more and more me, shall we say. Mm-hmm. And actually, when I was running, when I started my business, I decided I didn't want to work with anyone I didn't like, which was, at the time a very unusual decision, but I just thought it wouldn't make me happy. And I said more no than yes. And so actually that became our brand of a sort, that we said we only worked with people we liked and really believed in and kept saying no. And so then you could say, well, Lucy Marcus works with, and people, but that was unintentional. So let's talk about authenticity in the workplace.
So I have a lot of thoughts on this. I can't help but being me, but be myself. It's always been that way. So anyone who's worked with me knows I've always been me, for better or for worse, for decades. But it hasn't always worked well because I do think that there's almost there's a linguistic thing that goes on in meetings and in working environments where a woman's voice and how she speaks, you either don't get listened to or you're not taken as seriously as the way many men speak, or women who are incredibly eloquent speak. I recently, so
I think you're eloquent. I mean, I'm not just being nice, but I think.
Well, thank you. But I call it the debate society. Have you ever been in meetings and people are talking and the person who prevails is the one who you can tell was a debater in high school or college?
Yeah, they're really annoying.
So I call that the debate society effect. And then somebody else recently said that it was a guy, he calls it the tyranny of eloquence. So that's something I think about a lot, which is, and I think about it also when younger people, like my daughter's 20, and they'll talk with that kind of question mark thing at the end of the sentence thing. But that's how some of us speak, right? Yeah. But it's it doesn't work well in the workplace, especially when there's a meeting and there are more powerful speakers.
You always sound as if you're not sure of yourself.
So anyway, that's one thing I think about a lot, and I don't really know what the answer is, because if your authentic way of speaking is to speak in a non-debate society way, you need to speak that way. Otherwise, you're going to speak inauthentically. But the other thing I think about a lot is appearance in the workplace. Women, by and large, are meant to look better in the workplace than men. So a chubby guy who's wrinkled and rumpled and maybe overweight and such isn't going to have isn't going to be judged the way the comparable woman is going to be judged. There's no question about it. So I find myself often wishing that we could be in meetings with each other, but have screens in front of us and not be able to see each other. Because I actually think discussions would be so much more productive if people weren't actually looking at each other and having these unconscious biases.
I used to absolutely love doing Radio 4, and then they put webcams in the studio.
Yes.
I used to basically go in my pajamas.
For the morning programs, I did too. I mean, what's interesting is I think there are different me's. So there's boardroom me, which speaks and acts differently than, you know, panel with my buddies me or panel this morning me. I mean, they're different. I mean, this is a different feeling, and but all of them are me. I'm never not me. It's just I'm appropriate for that space. But that took years to get.
But these are again huge issues around unconscious bias. I mean, when I was first at The Economist, I was 23 years old. I was a proper American back then. You probably can't tell that I started out as a proper American.
It all went downhill.
It went downhill. And I was in this magazine which calls itself a newspaper because it's The Economist. And the editorial meetings every morning were really nearly all men who'd gone to Eton and Balliol. Yeah. And some of the men were actually as young as I was, and they would, with absolute supreme confidence that has been inbred in them from the moment of birth, stand there and pontificate about parts of the world that they had never been to. And I actually don't think I said a word for the first 6 months there. Yeah. But I was also kind of a punk back then, so in terms of authenticity, I certainly did stand out. But it is really, it actually matters. It doesn't mean we should take on the coloration. It doesn't mean we should speak with the voice of Eton and Balliol men, though God knows at The Economist I had to learn to write with that voice. But what it does mean is that we have to recognize if we are not getting cut through with our opinion, we need to figure out a way to do it. That is desperately important, because otherwise you just become an adjunct to this big groupthink corporate voice that you are part of. And so that's what I meant. This is part of the problem. It means that we end up collaborating in the distorted coverage that worries us.
Yeah, it's difficult. I'm impressed. I don't know where Jessica is, but she found the article I was talking about and just tweeted it, so I've retweeted it. Oh, there's Jessica. Well done, Jessica. So I'm impressed. See, women, we try harder. I want to take some questions from the room. A woman here who's on the end. Just wait for here comes the mic. Yeah, please. And you can say who you are as well if you like.
I'm Madalika Sika. I am a journalist, currently exploring options.
Good.
And I've worked in television, I've worked in NPR, I've worked in a startup. I want to go back to the issue of quotas. You see it, in television. Oh, who are your guests that you're booking? Well, you get into the sort of vicious cycle of, well, we need someone who can talk about how the Secretary of State would look at this, so you go for the former Secretary of State, although that's not a very good example because my daughters have grown up with 3 female Secretaries of State.
My son doesn't know that there can be a male Secretary of State.
But on the issue of quotas, particularly in hiring, I think sometimes it comes from a good place in the sense that, no, you know what? We have to make this happen, so this is what is going to happen. But the flip side of it is, if you are the person who was hired, as I have been, either because people wanted to focus on women or people of color, you will always have that tag on your back that you got that job because there was a company-wide decision that we needed to have more women around the editorial table, or we needed to have, more people of color here or there. And you will never, ever be judged by your peers or other people in the company because of who you are. And I think that that's just the fundamental problem with quotas, although I see the point of them in principle. So my preferred tack now, when I push for these issues, is it's a dumb business decision if you do not include the people you are serving. You know, in America, we're a country that's, you know, it's a lot of women, huge economic power. Minority communities, full of economic power. They want to see themselves, they want to hear themselves, and if they think that your company does not acknowledge them, your company's not going to survive.
Catherine and I are laughing because I have a very strong opinion on that. So
I think you should tell them what your catchphrase is that I want
I don't
to
think
put
I'm
on
allowed to say
T-shirt. You can miss out the swear word.
I can, okay. Well, first of all, here's my take on quotas. I am, as it says in that article that Jessica shared, I am unwilling to wait another generation to see more women in the boardroom. So in my context, I mean, that is embarrassing. I mean, what an entire generation, a generation ago, we didn't have Facebook, we didn't have Twitter, we didn't have a lot of things. I mean, when you think about what a generation is, that is just nonsense. But things won't change. There are certain things that won't change unless we force them to change. That's it. No one wakes up in the morning and thinks, you can tell I feel really strongly about this. No one wakes up in the morning and thinks, you know what, I think quotas would be good, let's put them in place. I am not a quota fanatic, and I don't, you know, and if I didn't think we needed them in a certain context, I would say no. On the other hand, Italy has a quota for women on boards. And I think it has worked really well. And the other women who sit on the boards, the board that I sit on here, are amazing. They're fantastic. So smart, and they really, honestly, they try harder. We read our papers, we get in there. I always say, put me on the board because I'm a woman, and keep me because I'm effing amazing. You know, I mean, I don't care.
It would be a good T-shirt, right?
I don't care how I got there in a way, because I know I'm really good at what I do. You know, and I know that I'm the expert in my field, and I know that because I have 110. I mean, if it were 30, I would not be so confident about it. But I know that I know my topic, and I know how to be a good board member. And I get this whole thing of we can't find good women. I have binders full of them. I mean, honestly. And so whatever gets us in there right now is what we need to do. And so I don't feel self-conscious because I was put on that board because I'm a woman, because I'm there. But it's what I do once I'm there. If I'm there and I'm not good at what I do, I deserve to be kicked off. There's no question, woman or not. If I don't perform, there are plenty of other women lining up who can fill the woman's spot. But if I'm good, then I'll get put on other boards and I'll remain on that board because I'm working myself silly. We had 12 meetings a year. I don't live in Rome. I fly over sometimes for a day and back again. I go to all of our committee meetings and so on. So women also, when they want it, they tend to try harder. And one of the things, this whole thing of, we'll get mediocre women, get back to me when there are as many mediocre women as there are mediocre men. I don't see, I don't see any of the women that I know who sit on boards falling asleep in board meetings. I see plenty of men. I've never seen a woman. Yeah. Yeah.
Where's the mic?
Oh yeah, can we have the microphone?
Oh, it's gone?
No, but for the webcast.
Oh, no, it's for the webcast.
Yeah.
It's different at different stages of your career, and I think that's the
Yeah, but we have to tell women, the young women as well, you get in how you can. It's a tough job market for young people. I don't care what gets them in the door. It's what they do when they get there.
Right, but
and
you need a support network. You
Yes.
need a support network within the...
We are your support network.
No, but that's why I said quotas on their own don't work, but that's not an argument against quotas. It's an argument for quotas and other measures too.
Yes, yeah. There's a woman who's right in front of you. You can just pass the mic to her.
Yes, thank you. My name is Nadia Bellardi. We had a panel on Thursday on diversity and transcultural competencies in journalism that you can all catch up on the web. And we talked about many of the issues that Catherine brought up in terms of the need to include diversity and a really transcultural perspective in employment and portrayal, specifically in media work. And it has a lot more to do with subtle diversities than just gender. It has a lot lot to do with class. It has a lot to do with your network of friends, who you went to school with, who you think about calling up when you need an expert opinion. But if you're interested in that topic, please do look up the panel. My question goes more on tactics, because if you're familiar with the Global Media Monitoring Project, that looks at the way media covers women every 5 years. The latest issue came out in 2015, and they saw that only 24% of the news that was published or broadcast had women in it. But they also saw that more women working in media didn't necessarily lead to better coverage. So again, what are the strategies there? Is it training? That's my point. My approach is it needs diverse and transcultural training to make people aware that identity is much more complex than just a few labels, but maybe you can give us some other ideas.
Thank you. Well, I think we need to take a couple of questions, and then because we're running short. Raju had a question up in the front here.
Hi, Raju Narasati with News Corp. So I'm looking around this room, and it looks like about 90% women here. How do you get, and maybe you can give specific examples instead of very generic ones in your experience, how do you get more men to pay attention to this issue? Specifically, what has worked maybe over the years for you, other than guilting them? And that helps too.
No. Okay, let's take one more, maybe the chap who's right across here.
I had the same question as he did. Because like a couple of times ago, I have read the Meryl Streep and Jennifer Lawrence. They were interviewed by the media, and they were complaining that people pay more attention to their aspects, to what dress do they wearing and how many boyfriends do they have, such stuff like that, instead of knowing what kind of work they were doing. So this kind of basically some like social rules, like people pay more attention to women because women are beautiful creatures. Like at the beginning of this session, I paid more attention to the beautiful scarves instead of hearing what was going on.
Well, we welcome your admiring. I mean, it's not like
that's basically how people were are doing now, this kind of situation. But in China, like women in this education system, they have much more higher reputation than men because people trust women to teach their kids instead of men to teach their kids. But in the media and journalism industry, that's the same problem because people don't trust women. And so in this kind of situation, do we have to like encourage more young women and women to do what they can do, or just try to change the social rules?
Good. Gabby, you wanted to take the first question, I think?
I'll just take a
melange.
They're all excellent questions.
A melange of questions.
By the way, in China, when you look at the lineups of the people who are leading the Communist Party, they're probably 90% male. So
yes,
women
hold up half the sky, only they don't.
I take your point. I mean, but you know, it's still the party is still male dominated, right? But your point about appearances is exactly that, which is we're judged, women are judged, we're looked at first on how pretty we are, or how slim we are, or what we're wearing, or are we wearing makeup, or what's the hair like,
But you can also be judged counter to that. I mean, I've also had men say, she's too pretty, she won't be able to do the job.
Yeah, well, you're just, it's the classic objectification
you can't get it right.
of women. To Raju's point is how do we bring men along? And the Gates Foundation, we're doubling down on our work, our gender work. And one of the things I'm pushing for is we have to embrace men in the developing world and the developed world. Because if the men are setting the cultural norms, they're the ones who are going to have to give them up and modify them on behalf of their wives and their daughters. So we actually have to partner with men and boys on all these issues. And that will involve hearing them out, talking to them, with them, educating them, and we have to raise our boys better. And men, and that's really all, that's the only way it'll work. So what has worked in the workplace? I don't think it really has worked in the workplace. I will say, though, that the Gates Foundation, I was surprised and pleasantly surprised, is our workforce is about 60% female. Why, I don't know. It could be because the global health field is more female than male. I don't know. And the last thing on diverse coverage, as I said earlier, I don't know if I said earlier, but the answer to making sure we're quoting more women and featuring more women is editors have to make sure it happens. Editors have to enforce it. So if they get a draft of a story and it quotes the usual male suspects, they have to send it back and say, try to find more women. If the reporter genuinely can't, well, then you go with the story. But the editors have to enforce it.
Yes, I mean, I agree with that. Unconscious bias training is incredibly important in the workplace. I am going to do a tiny advert for the Women's Equality Party because we have a whole raft of media policies that you can look up on our website, and I don't have time to list them here. So www.womensequality.org.uk. We have a policy document you can find there, and there is a whole section on media. And there are sections then on other things that support women in the workplace and support women in all sorts of other areas of life, including shared opportunities in parenting and caregiving. So I think, you know, you used the word holistic. I think there does need to be a holistic approach to achieving gender equality, as well as a very gritty and practical one. On men, you know, we're called the Women's Equality Party, but much to my delight, we have a lot of men joining us, and we are actively going out to encourage men to join us and work with us as part of the party, because it is very clear that there are benefits actually to everyone from gender equality, except for possibly a very tiny percentage of the population that wants to hold on to all of the power and all of the wealth. But generally, the equality agenda leads not only to better outcomes for women, but better outcomes for many men socially as well. And sorry, there was the question of representation of women in the media. Again, I mean, something that is unfortunately self-evident, but there are many this is where you can take some very practical action in terms of not just training in media, but also looking at advertising, looking at wider media, and in some cases legislating against or finding ways to stop the kind of really damaging images of women in the media in terms of, you know, for example, photoshopping that leads to body dysmorphia. You know, that there are very specific areas that it is possible to tackle there.
We need to draw to a close because since we're self-moderating, we also have to be self-ending. There are a couple things. I mean, there were so many things that I had listed that I want us to talk about, and there's never enough time. I would say, though, that just on one thought, which is the thing about bringing more men into the discussion and so on, I think that's really important, but it can go far the other way as well, where it's like the most important thing is we can get men engaged in the discussion. We have supportive men. We've seen that in a couple of groups where it's all about, you know, how many men they have, which then kind of doesn't quite do the thing. If it's all about how many, you know, we're good at what we do because we have men involved. Not right. But I do think that men are part of the equation. But I mean, it happened a couple of times. I was at the World Economic Forum, and there was a breakfast that, you know, sort of hit the headlines of a sort because it was all about women, and it had an entirely male panel. It was like, really? And so that was sort of unfortunate. And you know, there are things like that over and over again. One practical thing that we've talked about is if you're asked to speak at a conference, ask how many women speakers there are, volunteer to find more. You know, I've taken a stand that I won't speak at conferences where there aren't more women speaking, or if it's a women's conference put on by a media outlet that also has other conferences, but they have all the women at the women's conferences and the others are the men's conferences. That really makes me cross, and so I decline all of those. And I like speaking at women's conferences. The thing about this conference is actually, I have to applaud Christopher and Ariana because they asked me to make sure that I have enough gender balance on the panels, and that I make sure that I have women on the economy panel and so on. And I said, me? Of course I will. But it was a good reminder, and I really applaud the fact that it was something that they were conscious of and that they were asking about, and that was really important. I'm so grateful to all of you for your commitment to this issue, for being here, men and women. We are all active on Twitter and Facebook and LinkedIn, and to us, part of what we do is about creating community and helping people and keeping these conversations going. So I hope that you will, if you have other questions, ask us on Twitter. We will answer them, and we'll continue the conversation. If you live in the UK, join the Women's Equality Party. There you go. And thank you so much for being here. And we'll be around for a little bit so we can chat as well. And thank you so much to my friends. So we will demonstrate our prowess by moderating ourselves. Also, for those of you who are watching via the live stream, thank you so much for joining us. We're delighted that you are watching. And as I mentioned, I'll be taking questions via Twitter. So if you're watching and you have questions, and I've already gotten some great ones, if you could tweet me at Lucy Marcus, and then I'll take your questions, and we'll be taking a lot of questions from the room. So I guess we'll start with I'll start with a little introduction, and then we'll go from there. I must admit that I am next to two people who I adore and admire very much. It's not that I'm trying to get all my friends to come to Perugia to hang out with me, but here they are. And there are seats, for those of you who are standing but want to sit, there are some seats here, or there are many, or you can be on the stage with us because, you know, we're happy to share the stage. So Gabriella Stern, how long have we known each other? 15 years? And Gabby has worked in various capacities for Dow Jones and the Wall Street Journal for 30 years.
I was there for almost 25 years.
Okay, almost 25 years. I'm expanding. And she recently left 3 months ago to become the Director of Communications for...
Director of Media and External Relations for the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation.
Good. And Catherine Mayer, who I adore. Do men say that on panels? Is a world-renowned journalist who wrote for The Economist and also for Time magazine, and had a book come out last year, which was a biography of Prince Charles. But also, and it's almost unbelievable to all of us in some ways, about a year ago, she was at a conference and she came up with an idea to start the Women's Equality.
Hello?
No. Is it working now? Ah, good.
Oh, okay.
So in an effort to begin, we will begin.
Let's just start.
So, thank you so much for joining us, and I'm delighted to see such a great turnout for this session. We'll be talking about women in the media, and it's going to be a very sort of three-dimensional session, because we're not just talking about women who work in the media, and we're not just talking about women being covered in the media, and we're not just talking about one or two things, but we want to look at it very holistically. So I I'm very lucky. Well, first of all, I should note we had a moderator, but he had to go to the airport. So we will be self-moderating, which I think we're capable of doing, just to show we're the women in the media. Equality Party. And a year later, they have someone running for mayor of London, as well as a number of other positions, and it has grown huge. Really huge. Yeah. And so it's extraordinary. And then you see, you know, you have women who have worked in the media who are doing other things, and we'll draw from that. It's very strange to introduce yourself, I do a couple things. I write a column for Project Syndicate. I've written for Reuters, the BBC, another of other places, but I'm an opinion columnist, and I also sit on the board of a multinational company based here in Rome, Atlantia, and I sit on a number of boards. So when I'm writing, I'm very much opinion-based because, well, I have opinions and I like to share them. And so one of the things I'm going to talk a little bit about is women in the media, writing in the media, and also getting more voices in the media. But I thought I would start with Gabby. And let me just say this. We definitely want your questions, and because we want to talk about the things that you're interested in. And I've also suggested that one of the things we want to do when we are done with the panel is that you walk out with concrete things to know. Because many of us know there's a problem. Okay? And we're going to talk about what the problem is a little bit, but then we want to talk about solutions and suggestions and things that we can all be doing. So, Gabby, can you talk a little bit about your background and your career, and also some of your experiences and you think that might be interesting to share?
Sure. So I'm 55 years old, so I've been working for a long time. 25 years at the Wall Street Journal and Dow Jones, and then there was a decade before that at a regional newspaper called the Omaha World Herald in Nebraska. So I was in journalism for a long time, and as Lucy said, now I'm doing communications, media relations, meaning I work with journalists and talk to them